What's up, sophomores? Happy Wednesday. Gotta keep track of my days. It's Wednesday, April 22nd. It's about 9:14 a.m. Um, Here back at it again with another lecture slide. Today we're going to keep it pretty short, only a couple slides, so the video shouldn't be too long. We got to talk about the difference between capitalism and communism. It's kind of the root issue that surrounds the Cold War. And we're going to get into that today. We'll talk about that. And yeah, all right. Keep on doing your work for the week. Look for the questions in the videos. And yeah, all right. So let's get to it. All right. So if you haven't already, open up your slides. Go to slide 33. That's where we're going to begin. It's the one right after Che Guevara. If you need to pause the video, pause it now. And let's get into it. All right, so getting to the main point of the issue. The main point of the difference in Cold War. It ultimately revolves around two different principles around economics, which also impacts government policy. And the two differences we see here, or the main difference we see is the difference over the issues on capitalism versus communism. So in the slide you see on the left-hand side you see capitalism, and on the right you see communism, and we're going to talk about what that means. The first thing you need to know is that these are two models of economic principles. This is pretty much the philosophical beliefs that countries use to determine how to run their country and how to really run their economy. Often the two go hand in hand. You can't run your economy one way and then run your government the other way. Typically the two have to be one with each other, symbiotic. So let's look at capitalism. Capitalism values freedom and competition over everything else. It believes in limited government involvement in personal life and business. It leads to increases in technological advancements. And those are kind of its root things that it's down for. But on the back end, the negative side is you have high levels of wealth inequality. That means some people are really rich and you got some people who are really poor. So if we look at it piece by piece, capitalism values freedom and competition. The government stays out. It allows the marketplace to determine how things are going to be bought, spent, what's going to be made, what's going to, not be as popular. And as a result, because it values competition, the competition is going to lead to increases in technological advancements. So, for example, the reason the iPhone is so sophisticated as it is compared to when it first came out, even though it was pretty sophisticated then, is because Apple has to stay competitive. They have to encourage people to buy the new product because there are other competitive phones you could buy. You could buy a Google phone or the Android phones, right? That's how capitalism works, is there are multiple businesses competing for consumers' money. And if Apple didn't, upgrade the photo quality or upgrade the size or all these other things that they've done with all their new phones, they would not be as popular. So that's why in capitalism, you're going to see a rapid development of technological advancements because businesses need to stay fresh, poppin' new if they want people's money. If you don't develop and research new technological advancements, oftentimes you fall behind, you're not as popular. It's the same idea with fashion. Fashion brands have to be cutting edge, they have to think outside the box, they have to be creative. People aren't just going to buy the same things over and over again in a capitalist society, right? You have, different trends that come and are popular too. That's a part of capitalism. For example, pop culture made the fidget spinner really popular like 4 or 5 years ago, whenever that was. But now no one's really doing the fidget spinner anymore. The government didn't say to stop making the fidget spinner. It's just eventually our taste in what we like changes. And that's a part of capitalism because we have the freedom to kind of do what we want. This is going to be very different to communism. Okay? Communism. This values equality and sharing over everything else. The idea that everyone has the same amount of things and stuff. The government in communism is involved in every aspect of personal daily life and especially business. It leads to an overall increase in equality. But because there's no competition, and we'll talk about why there's not, you're not going to have a lot of technological advancement and growth, and there's also a lack of individual freedom and choice. So the big problem with capitalism is addressed in communism. Capitalism inevitably, because there's winners and losers, because it's a competition, you're going to have people who are really rich, like Jeff Bezos, and then people who are really poor, right? That, like, are at the bottom of living paycheck to paycheck or even homeless, right? That's how capitalism works. That's how the society of capitalism works. But in communism, no one's going to be that rich and no one's going to be that poor. Everyone's going to be the same. So in a communist society, a doctor and a janitor are paid the same. Or a teacher and a lawyer, they're paid the same. Although in a capitalist society, those jobs are valued at different numbers. So a lawyer and doctors would make more than teachers or janitors. That's often because they have to do more schooling, or those jobs are just more valued in those societies. So obviously, if people are getting paid the same amount in a communist society, you're going to have an increase in equality. The government's also heavily involved making sure that everything is equal. So properties are divided equally. Everyone has the same amount of space. There's only going to be so many choices for what you can wear. For example, in a communist country, there might only be one computer company, one phone company, one paper company, one pen company. That way, the consumer only has one choice, so that way everyone's the same, right? That way there's no, competition, everyone's equal, everything is regulated by the government. All of this does is, it increases equality. Everyone would be equal in a communist society. But because the government's heavily involved in making sure everything's fair, there's no competition, so there's not going to be any growth. For example, if I was in a communist society and I had a phone company, let's go back to the days of the flip phone, right? If there is no other competition, if I don't have to compete against anyone with my flip phone, I don't need to make a better phone. That's just the reality. I could take years to develop a new phone and people just keep using the same technology. Reason being is because people have to buy my phone. They don't have another choice. And that bleeds into individual freedoms and choice. If I'm a consumer, I don't have as much freedom. I can't really do what I want to do, buy what I want to buy the house I want to have. I have to be told what I'm allowed to buy. And this is the big philosophical difference between capitalism and communism. They both value certain things over the other, and they both have their kind of negative qualities. Capitalism is used by pretty much most of the modern world, and back in this time period, capitalism is the big belief of the Western European states and the United States. So think NATO countries, they're going to be capitalist. The communist countries are going to be the Soviet Union, China, North Korea. Eventually we're going to talk about Vietnam and other places and so on and so forth. These are countries that valued the communist philosophical beliefs. If you go back in time during the Cold War, the big fear between the NATO and US countries and the Soviet Union and communist countries was that either side was going to try and take over the other side to change their government and their way of life. And neither wanted that. And that is why the Cold War took place. It was an ideological war. It was what's better, capitalism or communism? If you really think about it, it's kind of silly that there was even a fight over this. We could have probably just let each other do our own things. At least that's what you might want to think. And maybe there's a point to that. But at the end of the day, Cold War really boils down to an ideological war. What was better, capitalism or communism? And that's what I really want you to take away from this video, is that the Cold War ultimately boils down to an ideological war. It was capitalism with the NATO and the US country versus communism, the Soviet Union, China, etc. All right? This is the point of the video where I ask you a question, okay? So hopefully you're paying attention. Your opinion, your question in this video, it's no right or wrong answer. I want you to answer in a couple sentences which society would you rather live in? A capitalist society or a communist society? All right? Just choose one, answer why you think. You can also look at real life examples and do your own research on Google. You don't even have to think that hard about it. Just listen to the things I've been saying and choose which one you'd rather live in. There's no wrong answer. All right? Make sure you include that in your answers for the end of the week. All right? Let's go to slide 34. This one's about socialism. All right? And socialism is a mix of communism and capitalism, because it's not as black and white as sometimes the media or the way you're taught it in books and whatnot really makes it out to be. The reality is you got to think of capitalism and communism as a scale. If we were in class and I had the whiteboard, I would show you kind of where countries lay on the scale. On one side of the scale, you'd have capitalism. That'd be the farthest, let's say this direction you could go. And on the other side of the scale, you'd have communism. That'd be the farthest direction you could go. Everything in the middle, though, right? If you're somewhere, even if you're almost to this edge or almost to this edge, as long as you're somewhere in that big middle, you'd be considered more of a socialist type of country. Although, as a socialist country, you might lean more capitalist or more communist tending beliefs. Today, pretty much the entire world falls under the umbrella that is socialism, each with varying degrees of how they lean, either slightly more capitalist or slightly more communist. To give you an example, in a true capitalist society, and we'll just look at the United States, for example, because we are a pretty hard-leaning capitalist country, and it's easier for us to understand, the idea of paying taxes is to fund schools or fund healthcare is a pretty communist tending belief, because the idea is if we pay taxes for kids to go to school and healthcare, is that everyone has the same access to public schools, everyone has the same access to healthcare. For example, if you were to go move schools, you went to James Logan, you would still have to take a world history class, right? If you went to some school in LA, you would have to take a world history class. You don't have a choice. That's because education is as a public kind of good, that the majority of kids are in public schools around the country. That's because the United States is like, you know what? We need to teach you kids so you don't, be doing crazy things before school, before the days of school. Same with healthcare. It's not everyone for themselves. Hopefully you don't get sick. It's, we need to take care of people. It's the best thing for our society. Even though the ideas of public school and maybe public health care, those are communist-leaning beliefs. Even capitalist countries like the United States, we have these things because we know it's for the best of for our society. However, other areas of the government are completely left alone, or other areas of our daily life are left alone by the government, including where we go to buy restaurants, what we're allowed to buy, how many phones I want, how many PS2 video games Mr. Tomei's bought in the last week. It's not that many, it's 12. So there's no quote on what I can buy and what I can do in that lens. But there are rules around, say, healthcare and laws and me paying taxes and things of that nature, right? And so everyone in every country in the world is on a varying degree, right? The United States would be significantly more capitalist. Places like if you go to China, Vietnam, Cuba, Russia, they're going to lean a little bit more this way on the communist side. And that's kind of how socialism plays a part too. Socialism became a more popular term after the end of the Cold War because everyone in the Cold War was like, it's either capitalist or communist. When in reality, we're all just, for the most part, somewhere on the scale of socialism. And that's where that word comes from. All right. And then the last side for today is just this. It's this hammer and the sickle. You'll see this on the Soviet Union flag, and I wanted you to just, this is a very common symbol when you think of communism. If you type up communism memes, you might see this image. The hammer and the sickle is to represent the labor force, the workers, the people, the sickle being the farmers who cut down the crops, and then the hammer being like the industrial factory workers. In communist countries, oftentimes the poor peasants are usually the leaders of the communist revolution. We'll talk about why later. And so a lot of these communist countries are rooted in the belief that the public worker, or the general public, the workers, are the strength of the country. And so that symbol is found not just on the Soviet Union flag, it's found on other flags today around the world. In fact, if you were to look up Angola's flag, they have a very similar image as well. Theirs is like a machete and a gear, kind of a half gear that's on their flag. But it's the same idea you'd be able to see. All right? So, we're going to end the video there. All right? Keep doing what you got to do. Make sure you're answering the questions. And take care. Be safe. Tome out.